or fallow field had disappeared through, with an ever-changing tangle of obstructing legs. Trying to crawl through them would only get him kicked in the head, possibly even by accident, and make life unnecessarily easy for the trio of bravos attempting to hem him in. Well, good luck with that. The panicking customers were hindering them even more badly than they were Drago. If he couldn't go down, then he'd have to go up. An old wagon wheel hung from the ceiling in the center of the room, dripping tallow from the candles spaced around its rim onto the customers below, most of whom seemed used to the inconvenience judging by the spots of grease on their shoulders. Drago vaulted onto the table beneath it, evading a sword thrust from a young man whose face seemed composed entirely of acne, and yanked the lad's extended arm downwards, trapping the blade beneath the sole of his boot as it rattled against the table. To his faint disappointment, the steel was of better quality than he'd expected, failing to deform enough to give him much of a boost upwards. But at least his would-be kebabber was too slow or stupid to let go of the hilt, trapping his fingers against the tabletop. An immensely uncomfortable sensation, judging by the noise he was making. And there was more than one way to eat a mole, as the saying went. A quick jump took him to the swordsman's shoulder, landing with a crack of breaking collarbone as the youth straightened reflexively, boosting the gnome upwards. The sword fell from his bruised and swelling hand, clattering against the floor. "You should get a compress on that," Drago told him, grabbing the makeshift chandelier and pushing off against the back of the young man's head with a kick which neatly dropped his suddenly unconscious form on top of the first two attackers, who by now had valiantly fought off the overturned table and were using one another to haul themselves upright. The rope securing the wagon wheel to the beam it depended from creaked ominously at the unexpected additional load, but held as Drago swooped across the room, scattering candles in his wake, most fortunately blown out by the speed of their passage through the air, the few exceptions adding a distinct odor of singed hair to the already rather close atmosphere. One or two customers yelped or shouted imprecations after him, but Drago ignored both, letting go of the swinging wheel at what he hoped was exactly the right moment. The two remaining thugs had shown a bit more sense than their colleagues, taking up a defensive stance in front of the door Fallowfield had disappeared through, rather than wading into the chaos of the overcrowded taproom. Both had drawn swords, though neither seemed to have much of an idea what to do with them. Probably the people they were used to dealing with found the threat of the weapons enough. The stocky woman on the left had taken up something resembling a proper guard position, the blade held out in front of her ready to split the oncoming gnome, though he'd have bet most of his purse that her chances of doing so would have depended more on luck than skill. Then again, he'd lost enough money at dice over the years not to dismiss fortune as a factor in anything, so he aimed his boot heels squarely at the man on the right, an overdressed dandy, whose slender build and violet eyes hinted at a bit of elvish blood somewhere in his ancestry, a hint confirmed by the speed of his reflexes. He brought his weapon round in a slashing arc as Drago hurtled at his head, quick, but not quite quick enough. As it was, the sword clattered to the worn wooden floor before it could connect, followed almost instantly by its owner, as Drago's sturdy footwear impacted with his face. Nasal cartilage snapped, and a gush of blood made a terrible mess of the tangle of lace clinging to the front of his shirt. "You need to get that in cold water," Drago said, rolling to his feet, although the chances of the stain not being permanent were negligible. The dandy seemed unappreciative of the advice anyway, although his answer wasn't really recognizable as words. The slurred gargling might have meant, "Thanks a lot, I'll do that." But Drago rather doubted it. He drew his own blade, parrying a clumsy cut from the woman by the door, and stared up at her, waiting for her to regain her balance. He smiled, in a manner he knew to be far from reassuring. "Just don't. Really?" She hesitated, glancing down at her erstwhile companion, across to the other three still thrashing on the floor like stranded fish, then back to the diminutive bounty hunter who'd felled them all with such speed and apparent ease. Her tongue flickered across dry lips. "You're really him, aren't you?" she asked, in a voice which hardly trembled at all. "Drago Appleroot,"